This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. With so much drama in the air, we see it's kind of hard being our upcoming guest who will be on not too long. But, hey, man, so much happening in the NBA sports world, so much happening in the sports world altogether. NFL season about to start. MLB playoffs is on the horizon. College football. But there is always some basketball to talk about. And, of course, to do that, you know I got to do with my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, Don Mac, contributor, right up on the illest websites, www.shawsports.net. Big Kahuna PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Are you saluting the NBA the same way as Colin Kaepernick is saluting the flag?
Whoa there. Whoa. I'm not even touching that one, man.
I mean, the show is already hot as it is. I just wanted to see if I could turn the temperature up just a little bit more.
Oh, man. I'm let Kaepernick and that afro do his thing and let him ride out. Not touching that at all.
He is going to be an extra on the get down. I'm kidding you. No, I want him to stand next to Books and see whose afro is growing the fastest right now.
Yeah, and it looks like he's got the gift for gab, like some of the dudes on the get down too. So he can definitely throw some jabs out there too, man. And that's a topic that, with all that's going on in the sports world right now, I think it's very, very much something that everyone is paying much attention to. But I'm going to go ahead and, like as I said earlier, back all the way off of that. And salute to all the fans and listeners of the NBA Baseline. Thank you for tuning in to another great week of NBA discussion and conversation. Can't wait to jump into all this week's topics, my man.
Yeah, man, we got a great show lined up for you. I know a lot of people has been all eyes on what's been happening in the NFL world and with Colin Kaepernick, but we got some good heated discussions to give you. And our man, Josh Eberly from Hoops Mag, he is on board to talk about the project that he spearheaded, Hoop 10. He'll be on in a little bit to talk about that and talk about what were the greatest individual performances by an NBA player. And now we're not talking about in a decade. We're talking about throughout the inception of the NBA. So he will be on board to help us talk about this very much heated topic that he launched so far this summer. And then, of course, in our segment of The Drop, Chris Bosh has been making waves, some of them good, and some of them could actually be bad. He is talking about coming back to play for the Miami Heat. Is that a good thing for Bosh, and is that a good thing for the Miami Heat? Sean and I will weigh in on that. And, of course, we got a coveted Coast to Coast where we discuss all the news happening in the association. So we want to welcome you and yours. Get your headphones on, get your iPads up, get your Roku channel box tuned in for this great, great episode we have of the Baseline NBA podcast. Get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. We always encourage you to get at the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. And please, by all means, hit us up on the Twitter handle. We are always responding, always loving the feedback and the comments. We're available on all the major platforms: iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn, Player FM. We're also available on Google Music. And as I mentioned before, also available on the Roku channel. So download any one of these as your go-to resources discussing all things NBA. Also simulcasting on the Sports Brothers. Big shout out to our boys down there in the South Florida area putting us on as we continue to give you everything you need to know discussing the NBA. So before we get into our great segment, The Breakdown, we got to get you geared up and ready for this upcoming NBA season. And what better way to do that is by following us and following our peoples at Fan Essentials, who will always hook you up with the proper NBA gear for this upcoming NBA season. Go to fanessentials.net. They get you dipped down in your favorite NBA team's merchandise delivered straight to your doorstep. They find the sports gear so you don't have to. Each fan box comes packed with some amazing gear. Great gift idea for any sports fan. Prices start at just $14.99 and $34.99. All you have to do is visit fanessentials.net. Use the promo code BASELINE at the checkout for 30% off of your first month. Once again, you go to fanessentials.net. Use the promo code BASELINE at the checkout for 30% off of your first month. Go to fanessentials.net so we can get you all the essentials you need for this upcoming NBA season. You know how we do, and you know how we like to set it off. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And this week, we are very fortunate, very lucky to have really one of the premier writers. You can see him all across all media platforms bringing up some really great topics, some really great article pieces discussing the NBA, whether it be a team, player, the league in general. He's been doing his thing for quite some time. And right now, he is really in the middle of one of the more talked about topics that we have leading into this upcoming season. When you look at the NBA and we start making those comparisons about great players and individual seasonal achievements and how we do with these top 10 rankings, right in the heart of it, our man, Josh Eberly, is joining us here, contributor for Hoops Mag, part of the Hoop 10 project. Josh, thanks for joining us this week, man.
Thanks for having me on. I know it was a struggle with the tech beforehand, but I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, man. Listen, I know that there's no love lost when it comes to America and Canada and stuff, but somehow, some way, man, we find our way to make these things happen.
You know, let's credit basketball. Basketball brings us all together, right?
Yeah, especially. And now your new project, the Hoop 10 project, might literally just tear this all apart, man. With so much tension going on, is now the time that you decide to go ahead and drop this really great concept and piece in the Hoop 10 project. Why don't you give our listeners an idea on what the Hoop 10 project is and how did this really come about for you in as far as your means to get this going and working with Hoop Magazine to put this out?
You know what? I'm really fortunate in that I have a good editor in Ming Wong over at Hoop, really open to a lot of ideas. And I pitched him on the project, I think, early in May, just saying, hey, I had an idea in the off season. It'd be a great way to collaborate with a lot of other guys in media, talk some basketball and, an NBA window, and we're doing the off season post Olympics. So basically it's a big media board. I got a panel of 27 voters, an editor, Ming, and an artist to do some cartooning for us. And we basically voted on the 10 best seasons in NBA history. How the greatness is defined, that's up to you. That was up to the voter. We ran with it. It was awesome. I mean, I had invites out to almost 50 media members, I think, at one point. Howard Beck, gave me a shout, said he'd love to be in. He's on holidays. But there's a lot of guys who kind of contributed to the pre-planning of this. And when it all came together, it's been a lot of fun. And, always a blast talking to people on social media and getting that kind of engagement going. So that's where we started with it.
So I remember seeing it on NBA Twitter, as they say, basketball Twitter, where I guess the call to action was starting to happen and everyone was really kind of on board with it being a great idea. So kudos to you, and to your editor, Ming Wong, as well, too, for making this project come to fruition. But I have to ask, this question when it comes down to all the contributions and then, what was left in and what was actually left off. I'm going to jump right in here, man. Like, I guess my guy was one vote away, but how did Oscar Robertson's triple-double season not make the top 10? Just tell me a little bit how that came to pass.
Well, I was on NBA radio a couple weeks ago talking to Eddie Johnson. He went at me right away, exact same thing. Yeah. How does Big O's triple-double season not make it? And, I can't speak for all the writers who voted, but I think it kind of came down to the guys who love analytics, who live and die by the stats. They don't love that 61-62 season due to pace, right? The same reason with the Wilt 50-25, a lot of them left it off because they're under the impression that, if we had as many possessions today in the NBA, those stats wouldn't be as absurd. So I think he lost some ticks from those guys. And then in the same breath, that 61-62 season, which is so crazy. Bill Russell wins the MVP, wins the championship. He didn't make this list. Oscar came 11th, didn't make this list. Wilt, who came second or third in that MVP voting, made number 4 on this list. So, just a crazy season.
Josh Eberly joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to check him out on Twitter at Josh Eberly. So Josh, and I see maybe that's the reason why you're in Canada right now, man. You need to hit a safe house, man, because you're going to have a lot of people probably asking that question specifically about Oscar Robertson. But my question to you is, what was the criteria essentially? Like, what, where was it that we're saying this is a realistic expectation to value these individual seasons, to be able to rank them in the way that they do, especially since there are certain categories. When you're reading the article, there are certain categories that you're saying to yourself, well, how far back is it that they're going? Because maybe just by that in itself, Oscar Robertson probably wouldn't have made it from a statistical standpoint when you just look at the totality and the body of work and the competition as well, too, in that era that they represented for you to put those rankings together. Like, what was some of the caveats that you guys had to weigh in on making this type of assessment?
So not word for word, but when I was sending out, the ballots to everybody, it was, it's up to you, 10 greatest individual seasons. If winning a championship is paramount in every season to you, that's fine. If the highest player efficiency rating is paramount to you, that's fine. Just try and back that up with a little bit of reasoning for each guy. So, we had that discussion, and a few people came back to me and said, well, what if I haven't seen them play? Like, I don't want to do those guys wrong by not voting for them, but I don't want to raise them over guys that I love watching. So, it really was a mix-up. It's hard anytime you tackle that many years of history. We're talking about 50, 60 years of basketball, really, that guys could be in the mix. And it's a big project. It's a big task. We had writers and contributors that were 19, and we had contributors that were in their 50s. We had contributors from Canada, USA, Australia. I think I've got one guy from England on there. There's a big mix. We tried to spread it out in the crowdsourcing project so that you did get a fair review. I think things are always a little bit tilted against the older guys from our generation just because we didn't grow up with them. That said, to see Oscar come 11th, to see 71 Kareem make it, to see 62 Wilt make it, I think that we did a decent job in trying to look at the whole picture.
Yeah, I think you did as well too. You have a lot of great guys on the list, and you're the cartoon artist, Daniel. He's done an amazing job with some of those things too. But we've even had a lot of your contributors on our show. Tony Jones is a great friend of our show. Nick from B-Ball Breakdown, great friend of everybody in the basketball world. Justin Termini from Sirius NBA as well too. So great job compiling this list. But when it comes to this overall Hoop 10 thing going on here now, where does your personal ranking go? Well, better question, how are you doing in the overall ranking? So we have, as we record this show, we're up to number 4 right now. Where are some of the guys that you slotted? Have your guys made the list in their specific seasons? Because I know guys like Wilt, Jordan, LeBron, even Magic, even Larry Bird could have had multiple seasons listed in here. Where's your own personal list? How's it doing in the Hoop 10?
So a couple of my guys, I don't want to give any spoilers, didn't make it. A couple guys I didn't have on my personal list have made it. So Magic, who just went 86, 87 Magic, who went 4th here, I didn't have him on my list. And as I was writing that one, I was going back and forth. I got feeling guilty, but it's such a hard project. Every guy that's gone up, the reaction from Twitter has been, wow, this guy's an eye now. How could he have already gone support? Which is great. That's what you're looking for, but that's how you feel with every guy. Kevin Garnett's 03-04 season actually made my list at number 10. It just missed as well. I think it finished 14th or 15th overall. It was an option for everyone, and it was stated in the ballots that if you felt like a guy deserved multiple seasons, have them in for multiple seasons. So I had multiple seasons of LeBron James and Michael Jordan on my list. I actually had 3 from Jordan and 2 from LeBron. We could still see, theoretically, another season from LeBron James or Michael Jordan in the top 3. To this point, nobody has had 2 seasons make the list, but a guy, for example, editor Hoops Habit, fan-sided guy Phil Watson, great hoop head, older guy, he can tell you some history, but he, I think, only had 4 guys total on his list. I think LeBron, Kareem, Shaq, and Jordan took up all 10 of his spots. So, these lists really were buried when you had them sent in.
Josh Eberly joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. He is one of the main contributors for Hoop 10, the summer project that you can catch on NBA.com or hoop.nba.com. Be sure to check this out as they are periodically releasing the 10 greatest individual seasons in the NBA. And I believe that they're released Mondays and Thursdays, correct?
Yeah, this Monday we're actually going to roll to Tuesday for Labor Day, but every other Monday, Thursday, yeah.
Yep. And so the countdown is very impressive. Josh, one of the things that I'm finding very intriguing, because look, I take nothing away, and this is a very hard list. So I really appreciate the fact that you've reached out to as many resources as possible to have them give their interpretation of who they felt should represent this top 10. But I think what's really scary to me is we're not talking like as far as the seasons that have already made this list and what we have left to go, which is essentially three more players. You know, I'm just wondering about some of the recent individual seasons, like possibly any one of the seasons that was done by Steph Curry or maybe even Kevin Durant. And I understand that we look back at some of the 2000 seasons. Was it much harder to look at the 2000s generations and say there was a season within this spectrum well deserved of than what we obviously have seen during the era of Jordan and Bird and Johnson and even West and Havlicek? I mean, which era represented the toughest for you to be able to pick and choose and say this one probably best represents that individual season that stands out amongst the plethora of those?
I think that's a good question. I think the late 2000s, before we hit the 10s, was tough for a lot of people, just gauging their ballots. I mean, there was a lot of people who had, I think Kevin Durant's 2013-14 got 4 or 5 votes. And then at the same time, you had guys like 05, 06, Kobe who just missed it. There was a lot of indecision. Like Iverson got a couple votes in 01, didn't make the list. But really, it's the 80s. And I mean, I touched on this Magic piece, but we now have the Larry Bird 86 made the list, Michael Jordan 88 made the list, Magic Johnson 87 made the list, and they were all over the place. I don't know if we're going to release the voter spreadsheet or not of everybody's ballot, but if you look at that ballot, you'll see Magic, 2 or 3 slots higher than Jordan. In the next ballot, you'll see him 2 or 3 lower than Bird. And I mean, that era was some crazy, crazy basketball. And even more testament to that, a guy like Isaiah Thomas didn't have a single vote. So unbelievable era of basketball. I think really tough for people to just split and say this was the best season of that time period.
So I think when I was going through, even going back to some of the honorable mentions and things like that, Josh, I think the most recent season, you mentioned Durant, was at 12-13 or 13-14, but I guess it's Anthony Davis season made one of the honorable mentions list. Were you surprised to see that season specifically was even able to make honorable mention?
Actually, you know what? Before I had even started compiling my list, it was in my mind, just because I've been writing a piece at the time about how Anthony Davis had gone from, we thought he was going to be the next perennial MVP, to he kind of fell off this year with some injuries and the Pelicans not playing so well. But that season really was special, and especially if you guys were, if you are numbers inclined, if you do like the advanced statistics, it was a really, really beastly season, and it put him on a trajectory up there with Kevin Garnett, up there with Tim Duncan. So I wasn't surprised he got a vote, but then as I started to sort through my own ballot, I was like, he didn't win MVP, they didn't get out of the first round of the playoffs. There's just no way I can justify with all the great seasons we have, but I wasn't surprised to see it, no.
Josh Eberly joining us here. Be sure to check him on Twitter at Josh Eberly, contributor for Hoops Mag, part of the Hoop 10 project, which is currently being released, the 10 greatest individual seasons. Josh, a couple more questions before we let you ride on out into the sunset, man. So I was often, to me, when I look at this, I felt like this is probably about as bold a move as any to basically culminate the 10 greatest seasons when you look in totality of the NBA and where the NBA has started and where it's eventually has gone to. And when we're talking about the NBA, are we also including the ABA? Are we including the seasons prior to the merger, or just in the inception of when the NBA really came as whole? And how come maybe the thought process was to look at each individual decade or each individual era, and out of that era pull maybe the 5 best and then assess the 10 greatest? Like why was the thought process to just jump right in at this particular moment in the 2000s to say, let's go all in and figure out and just kind of get kind of gauge where we thought these would be the greatest individual seasons ever?
I guess I can answer in 3 parts. The ABA was included. That was another caveat in the ballot. You were welcome to use ABA seasons. Dr. J got 2 votes from the ABA year amongst the 27 voters, but he was the only guy from the ABA in an ABA season to get a vote. In regards to why didn't we do it eras or why didn't we lower down the list and then vote from there? To be honest, I just didn't know what the response would be like in the off season. I mean, I had conversations with guys like Matt Moore, Alex Kendi, I mentioned Howard Beck earlier, and a lot of the bigger writers, this is their holiday, right? They're taking time off. Mm-hmm. I wasn't sure how involved everyone was going to be, but I've been blown away. I mean, you mentioned Tony Jones as a friend of the show. Tony just slayed me throughout this process. I mean, as he was,
don't let the Mormon state fool you, brother. Don't let the Mormon state fool you. Tony got sniper in his veins, man.
He's from New York, so.
Oh, man. He's texting me. He's like, you're not going to believe who I have on the list. And I look on his list, and, like, of course, like, the only guy, Tiny Archibald, I think 6 on his list. He's the only person. But, I mean, Tony is a ton of fun. Everyone has been awesome. I've had guys who sent in their submission right at the start and have since edited it because they wanted to put more thought into not their rankings, but like the reason for their rankings. So I think I might have actually undersold how much commitment I was able to get. I didn't know if I was going to get this level of effort, participation, turnout, but we did. So I think if I did it again or if we did a similar project, I would do it in 2 parts. The other reason, though, is just it's the off season and it's meant to be a conversation. So it's not meant to be the be-all, end-all. I'm not Bill Simmons. I'm not going to claim this is the pyramid in which we should evaluate players going forward. But it's just, if nothing else, it's a reference for somebody else's article. It kills your, Sunday afternoon at the barbershop goes by a little smoother. If that happened, I'm quite happy.
Josh, real quick. Was there anyone that you received or that was submitted as a season that you didn't expect to actually be considered on the list? Because a lot of the seasons that I've seen on here, I don't think that there's a question. I think it's just a matter of whether or not it was deserving to be top 10. But for it to be in the conversation, I don't think there was a question. Was there one that, that they put out there like Earl of Pearl Monroe's season, or, what I'm saying? Like one that you said, damn, I really didn't think about that, and maybe kind of flew under the radar because of the greatness of what other players might have done that would have been in this conversation as being a top 10 individual season?
There's a couple. I think Robert Little of Black Sports Online, he sent me one. I think he had Iverson 01 in there. And I mean, even if you're an Iverson guy, even if you're factoring what he did for the culture, that one kind of caught me off guard. I didn't think Iverson would really get a vote here. And then Coach Nick, a B-ball breakdown, actually had Dennis Rodman.
Wow.
Can't remember which of the Bulls years he had him, but he had Dennis Rodman at number 8 on his list, and that was my biggest fist in my mouth. I'm not going to say mean things about Coach Nick. He's a basketball genius. He would talk me out of my shorts, but I was just really like Dennis Rodman. But I mean, his reasoning was his rebounding, control of the game, his defense, control of the game. I mean, he sold his strengths, but at the time, I would just no.
Yeah, Coach Nick's.
But there's bound to be a couple, right? I mean, there's bound to be a couple.
Yeah, no, we love Coach Nick. We've had him on the show a couple of times, and he definitely looks at things from a different perspective, and I think a very good perspective. He said a wealth of basketball knowledge. So it's great that he was able to bring in different. I'm sure Dennis
Rodman loves him some Coach Nick now more than ever.
I'm sure this is the best.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, this is the best press Rodman has gotten in quite some time. So.
Rodman might put his wedding dress back on one more time, man.
My God, So Josh, before I let you get out of here, I just kind of wanted to ask, you said, the process was, kind of open, if you will, and you could use different things to evaluate. But again, being the kind of creator and founder of the project, what did you look at primarily? Did you rely heavily on some of the analytics and statistical analysis to kind of weigh your, things like PER and things like that, win shares, et cetera, or was it about, the championships and, did they get defensive player of the year or MVP or things like that? What was your own personal process that helped you evaluate your top 10?
So I looked when I sat down to finally make my list, and I had a good 10 submissions before I sat down and really started to hammer mine out. I took off, if you didn't have an MVP or a championship, I listed about 25, 30. I had 28 guys. If you didn't have an MVP or a championship in that year, I crossed you out. It was, you got to go. Because, I mean, it's just too hard. So many guys had both. If you didn't have one that year, I didn't want to include it. So then I went back and I thought, well, wait, I mean, there's still guys like 61, 62 world. So, I mean, there was a couple cases in terms of lore where they got the exception, but they had to have an MVP or championship. And then when it got to that point, it was a little bit advanced numbers for me. I'm a big believer in win shares. I'm a big believer in player efficiency rating, especially for years that I didn't get to watch all the games. So like when I'm looking at 70s Kareem versus say, 80s Moses Malone, guys that I didn't get to see really go at it other than what I've seen finals and replay stuff. It was, how did their numbers compare to guys in the years? How much did they really clean up? How many votes did they get for first in that MVP race? That stuff really came into play for me.
Any follow-up, Shaw?
I mean, I'm looking back at some of it, and I think, what he's saying with that, like Duncan is a guy I think who really probably steps into that too. And, some of I remember having one of my friends be a huge Duncan fan and just on my case about how good he was. But even like seeing that, he made his 2002-2003 season, seeing what he did do in that season, that makes a lot of sense. And I think if I were to be part of this project too, I would probably rely a little bit more on some of the analytical analysis like Josh did here too, man. So I think this was an amazing thing to kind of do. And we can't thank you enough as a basketball and hoop heads, if you will, for giving us the ability to have this conversation throughout the summer. And very anxious to see, what the top three guys end up being. I don't know if Shaq is on the list somewhere or somehow, in this top three. I tend to think probably not, but I'm sure you've gotten killed for not having Shaq somewhere on this list already. Would that be correct?
There are some very worried Shaq fans out there. I can tell you, NBA Twitter has some concerned Diesel lovers out there, but. Nobody tops Kobe, and Kobe, when 05-06 Kobe wasn't the guys that missed, I think, if you search my name and Kobe on that day, there's a good 50 tweets telling me what an idiot I am. And,
well, you hang in there.
I mean, you gotta love that stuff, though. You gotta love that people are that passionate that, they're going to take the time to click the article and not read anything else as soon as they see Kobe Bryant on there. That's some loyalty.
Yeah, I mean, it's name watching for a lot of people, and then for others, they really want to see the rationale behind why it would be justified that this person would be ahead of that person. It makes for great. One, I think it really kind of separates the men from the boys when it comes to the passionate NBA fan, and I think it also. It allows us to be able to enter into generations that most people have not taken the time to. You might not be able to remember every single team and what they did in that era, but you may remember what one person did in a specific season. And sometimes these type of projects help to bring that out, and it helps to kind of spark people's intent to want to go and research this information and kind of look at, who are those guys playing against and, what did they do outside of just that one particular year that, why this guy gets so much hype and gets so much pub over my generational player. And I think that's what helps allow us another, way to learn more about the game and learn more about how the game has evolved and who is helping to evolve the game, because it can't just be that, it can't just be Jordan in the 6 rings. We're going to assume that every single season that Jordan had won those rings, that was the greatest performance as any basketball player. We say that he's the greatest player ever, but it doesn't mean that every single year that he did that, it constituted him being the greatest player ever. And so this is those type of projects that helps, kind of bring that to the forefront.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that has been some of my favorite feedback is, there's been a few people who said, I wasn't alive for this, or I didn't remember that. And I'm just enjoying reading about these years that we don't talk about on a night in, night off basis, that TNT doesn't compare, guys to, especially big men. I mean, with how small the league is today with the wings, some of the great graphics that you see in NBA during NBA broadcasts now are focused on wing production, comparing them to wings of the past, but the forgotten big men of the past. I mean, there are some great seasons. I got to write about the Wilt 61-62. We got to talk about Kareem in Milwaukee. I mean, I got a lot of positive feedback from some people saying, I didn't remember that. I wasn't here for that. And it was cool just reading about that era of basketball. So definitely love hearing stuff like that.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. So what is there something that you think would be next for you in terms of this type of project? I know it's for the off season, and we got some time on that too, but you even mentioned something about guys, like Iverson, what he did for the culture of basketball. I think maybe Jordan would always be one on that list, especially from this generation of writers and contributors per se. But, what's another kind of trendy thing that you think would be interesting to maybe discuss maybe for next summer?
Well, there's been some low end, secret, low key talk about doing a similar project, opening it up to a bigger invite list, trying to get a full 50, and we're going to do best playoff performers. That's on the back burner right now. That's something I don't know if we do try to venture that this off season. Like you said, maybe next summer that's something we work on. But also next week I got a big project. Spent a lot of time on it, doing a watchability power rankings just for this season. That'll come up on Hoop, and you get to hear me say some funny things about your team if I don't really want to watch them next season, or some nice things about your team if I do. So make sure to check that out.
Well, I'm sure Steph Curry's last 2 years will definitely not be in consideration for those votes, but we don't know. Coach Nick might throw a monkey in the wrench on that assessment. So,
yeah, you never know. You never know.
He is the man. Definitely check out the project. It's called Hoop 10. You can find it on NBA.com, Hoops Magazine. Big contributor, Josh Eberly. Josh, man, we really appreciate you topping on board and kind of giving us some insight on this project. It's so far generated a lot of heat, good and clearly heads and shots fired amongst all of the top writers and stuff, man. But it's well worth the discussion, and it's just great to see that you're a part of it and making it happen, man.
Thanks so much for having me on the show. It was a blast. I love talking about it. Keep your eyes peeled Tuesday. I think you want to talk about shots fired, wait for Tuesday. I think it's going to be a big one.
Most definitely. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, The Baseline NBA podcast. And this week's topic on The Drop, a lot of heavy wording, emanating throughout the media circuits. I'm sure down in the South Florida area, Shaw, is Chris Bosh. And the talks are that, he foresees himself playing in a Miami Heat uniform for this upcoming season. Now, if everybody is not fully aware of what's been happening to Chris Bosh over the last 2 years, he has basically been dealing with a cardiac situation, blood clots in the heart area. This has been said to have possibly been career threatening. And in 2 different occasions, there has been talk about whether or not Chris Bosh should basically end his NBA career over this situation. But every single time he has fought the good fight, he has found a way to get back on the basketball court. But since recently, over the last few months, especially when the Heat was making their run to try and get into the playoffs, the Miami Heat had to quash down a lot of the fight that Chris Bosh was putting out to say that he wanted to come back and play. And thus now we're at a point now where it's an extended off season. Clearly the Miami Heat didn't achieve its goal having Dwayne Wade. And with all the frimmer and the fever pitch that's happening now, Shaw, for Chris Bosh to basically be saying, I think I'm good that I can come back and play for this upcoming season, given all of the turnover and change. What do we make of this? And if you're the Miami Heat, what should you really be thinking about right now when it comes to Chris Bosh?
Well, if you're the Heat, you just want him to do what's best for him from his personal standpoint, not necessarily even his basketball standpoint. I think there's a lot of conversation about, whether or not if he can come back, how effective will he actually be, and if this condition will reoccur with the blood clots, and can he play on blood thinners and things of that nature. They're just trying to be as confident and as careful as they possibly can about his overall health and well-being, because we've discussed it on our show previously. It would be a media nightmare, let alone just the social impact of having somebody fall out, or God forbid, if anything really bad happened to Bosh as a result of coming back, from this injury. But he is pushing so hard and so heavy. Players Association is on the brink of really getting involved in this. And this is gonna come to a head at some point very, very soon. But this past week, he was on social media. He's out there. He was working out with D Wade, his old friend. He's in the gym. He said, in a Snapchat post, hey, everyone's asking if I'm a hooper. Of course I'm a hooper. Almost really defiantly in his conversation, and in the whatever 15 seconds of the Snapchat video that he took. I'm concerned from his medical condition, but this is a very dicey situation, I think, for both parties to be playing in.
I think it's a dicey situation for both parties as well, too, Shaw. Where it's dicey for me, though, is the perception that I think is now starting to kind of rise, or if maybe you're sifting through all of the hoopla and propaganda. There was something to be said about what happened to Dwayne Wade. We talked about this. He left the Miami Heat organization to go play for the Chicago Bulls. And everybody knows that this move by Dwayne Wade was not the best move for his overall career. Clearly, probably wasn't the best move for the Chicago Bulls, maybe in some standard of, bringing people to the stadium, because we still think that the Chicago Bulls will be a contending basketball team in the Eastern Conference. But for the Miami Heat, I think there is a perception, and you talked about this with Pat Riley and the Heat management and how they handle players, personnel, and situations like what's happening with Chris Bosh. And I think at some point you really have to start weighing in, obviously, what's best for the organization, what's best for that team moving forward, and what should be best for Chris Bosh, if Chris Bosh himself is going to walk down that same kind of road where there's a level of player defiance, how that looks when the Miami Heat doesn't seem to handle this thing properly behind closed doors, and how this tends to leak out to where now the public perception now starts playing a factor in how the Miami Heat chooses to approach handling Chris Bosh before the season begins.
Yeah, I mean, they're typically a very tight-lipped organization. But even as a result of the conversation we're having here now, after Bosh's videos and posts, the Heat kind of had no comments, said there's no update on Bosh's condition or whether or not he'll be there. But then Heat owner Mickey Arison tweets out, "Can't wait to see you in training camp," which is obviously just a month or so away. And that then caused some speculation as to what's really going on within the Heat organization between he, Riley, and Bosh himself. And that's what I think we're all waiting to see. The terms of a medical retirement, are not necessarily, they're clear, but they do have some wiggle room too for the player and for the team as well too. You kind of have to wonder now, if Riley specifically is trying to force him into sort of medical retirement, because if he doesn't play, for a full calendar year, which I think would be February 9th of 2017, then his salary can be taken off of their books. But if he plays even one game between now and then it kind of sets that whole mark kind of back, if you will, a little bit. And Bosh clearly wants to be out there. But again, he has kids, he has a wife, he's proven a lot in the NBA already. If his career, or not, screw that, if his life is really at stake here, I don't even understand what the question is. But he seems to think otherwise, and that's, I don't know sometimes. When you're talking about a guy who's competed his entire life, if he knows if he can just turn that switch off and understand there's something bigger at play than just basketball.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our subject of the drop: Chris Bosh making a return to the Miami Heat. Is it or is it not? So let's put the money aside for a moment, Shaw, because what I'm really thinking about is how this really is going to play when you look at this roster that the Miami Heat has. And I got to say this, a lot of people continue to spaz on Erik Spoelstra. He had the good fortune of having, the tres leches with LeBron, with Bosh and Wade, to give himself a platform to see the Miami Heat go to 4 NBA finals, winning championships out of 2 of them. But I don't think people really, and to this point, again, I just feel like there's still this underlying tone that they don't buy into Erik Spoelstra being a legitimate coach. And when I look at a situation like this, you couldn't ask for a better coach to be able to handle the nonsense that could actually be a distraction for what right now is considered a very young basketball team, with some really interesting characters. Hassan Whiteside, kind of an interesting dude. How is Erik Spoelstra going to manage him? And let's keep in mind, Chris Bosh and Hassan Whiteside were not the greatest front court tandem when Chris Bosh was healthy prior to the blood clot situation sidelining him again. So if there is that possibility that Chris Bosh does come back out there onto the basketball court, Erik Spoelstra has to figure out a way to get those 2 guys to play as one, because ultimately they are going to spearhead the Miami Heat's offensive weaponry that clearly is going to be a factor for them to be in the conversation about the Eastern Conference playoff picture once again.
Well, I'm definitely on the side of Spoelstra being a quality NBA coach. I think he's proven that after winning multiple championships, but not just winning the championships. He's endured a lot of, again, kind of duress, if you will, with this roster and this organization in general, from acquiring LeBron and then LeBron bumping him on the sidelines and, all of that, and then getting LeBron to kind of buy into
and then LeBron going bump that and going to Cleveland. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Again, from winning with LeBron, then LeBron leaving, and then now Wade leaving, and now the situation with Chris Bosh as well, handling a mercurial guy like Hassan Whiteside within that organization for the last 2 seasons. Listen, Spoelstra's, he's been tested, on and off the floor, and he's answered the call on each and every single time. And there are certain times or certain rosters that he's had that what could he have really done? I think he's done the best he could potentially do with what he was given and at each step of the way. But this will really be a test, I think, of his overall coaching skill and his ability to rally the troops, if you will, too, because let's say right now he doesn't want to get involved in what's going on with Bosh and management. Like, listen, he just has to say, whoever you say can play, then I'm going to play and figure out the best schemes in order to make that roster work. But this is not a conversation that he really can interject in and say, well, you know what, I think it should go this way or that way, because
I don't think he wants to be the one to say, I really need Chris Bosh. I mean, you look at that roster, Goran Dragic is still an unknown factor. Justice Winslow is only going to be in his second season. Hassan Whiteside, again, he can be a top tier type talent, and at times he could basically be the missing link. You know what I'm saying? So Chris Bosh could be your most consistent player. It doesn't mean consistently that equates to wins for this Miami Heat team if this is a new roster turned over for him to have to deal with. So clearly any advocation that he makes on his part twofold might lean him towards being someone that's questioned as a quality head coach, and more so this is a coach where the perception is he's a players type of coach where the players are going to play for him but not play for the organization.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's dicey, for him specifically as well, too. So, like you're saying, I think he is kind of a player's coach. The players seem to trust him and, again, eventually fall into his schemes, if you will, and understand that, he has the trust of the lofty and coveted Pat Riley, so that he, too, should be respected. And, again, he's earned it at this point by winning multiple championships and balancing a roster of Bosh, LeBron, and Wade at the same time. But you're right. I think right now he's at this, well, again, I just have to play the cards that I'm given. I'm not trying to take sides. I'm sure he's talking to Bosh on this, through text or maybe even in person at times, just trying to keep his spirits up. And as a coach right now, that's what you want to do. You want to be focusing on Bosh, the person, and making sure he's making the best decision he can make for his life. And you still have to let that be up to Bosh and say, hey, you know what? I'm here for you. I support you in whatever decision, comes to pass. But he still has a job to do within the organization as well, too. So that's why I say he's kind of toe the line a little bit, and we don't really know what he's doing kind of off the scenes.
All right, when you look at Chris Bosh, and listen, last year he played 53 games. The year before that he played 44, and he hasn't really played a 78 plus season since 2013. He played 79 games, but the last time he's even played 80 games was back in 2004 and 5. And I know the NBA has changed since then, but is it outside the realm of imagination that as Chris Bosh is trying to put himself in a position where he can get himself back on the basketball court? It isn't like the guy is 40 years old. I mean, he's got years left. And because he hasn't played a number of games over the last couple of seasons, we can kind of safely say he has fresh legs. It's just a question of whether or not he still has that game in him. But can it be said that for Chris Bosh that he can provide something positive for these front court players that the Miami Heat have? Like, we saw that in Alonzo Mourning, when he was on the back end of his career, and obviously there were certain injuries and things that were putting him in a position where he had to consider retirement. Guys like Juwan Howard, they all have been a factor in helping the Miami Heat become a quality basketball franchise from a player perspective. And they learn and listen to those guys. Can Chris Bosh do that while he is trying to make this comeback?
I think if he wants to, if he can, take his mind off of the focus of playing at a high level per se, I think either way, he has the ability to teach a lot of the young of the Heat's young guys and get them on a level where, they can understand what it takes to be professional, what it takes to be an NBA champion and to compete in the playoffs and all of those things too. But I think right now he's primarily focused on himself, and with a condition like this, how could you not be? I think the Heat, if it were to go south, if you will, in terms of him not being able to play, they'd make sure he landed somewhere or landed well within their organization in an Alonzo Mourning-esque Alonzo Mourning-esque type role where he could be, a mentor and a key figure within the South Florida community as well. But right now, that's not Bosh's concern. Bosh wants to get out on the floor, and he wants to prove to everybody that he can still play. And then, helping the young guys and all of those things, that'll kind of come along with the territory if he gets back on the floor himself.
Do you see Chris Bosh being the alpha dog for the Miami Heat, or will he have to lean on guys like Josh Richardson and Goran Dragic to facilitate him to be in the best position to get those?
Richardson. There's no way. I mean, Josh Richardson going in the second year, that's not somebody that, is going to be leading this roster. But Dragic is somebody, I think, who's been in the league obviously a little while, a veteran guy. And when I went to their training camp, or the opening of their training camp last year, Dragic was glowing about the possibility of getting some real time with Bosh, because Bosh went down with that same medical condition right before Dragic came 2 seasons ago, as Dragic was acquired at the trade deadline. Dragic could say, okay, I can't wait to actually play with him now. This is a guy who can play pick and roll, pick and pop, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the two guys that are going to have to lead this team, I think, from if they can, again, if Bosh can play, from a statistical standpoint and from a leadership standpoint, giving Spoelstra some help from the baseline as well too. But UD's also there too. Hasn't gone anywhere, and he's another guy who really helps these young guys and people matriculate through the NBA. So they still have that culture of leadership and understanding and getting people acclimated to the NBA, and more so the South Florida community. But Richardson and Winslow and those young guys, they're not going to have that type of role. They got to just focus on player development themselves, not necessarily worry about taking a leadership role just yet.
All right. Well, the Miami Heat have got their work cut out for them, obviously, in this offseason. Right now, there are 19 players under contract. Obviously, only 15 can make the cut. And then they still have to consider Chris Bosh and his situation, so Eric Spoelstra definitely, is on the grind. Pat Riley has got a lot on his mind. Mickey Aronson just wants to see this basketball team try to replicate what they did last season. But it'll all culminate soon in the next couple of months, and we'll be watching very readily to see whether or not Chris Bosh will be sporting that uniform from the Miami Heat for the 2016-2017 NBA season. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop. Time now to go coast to coast, giving you the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's rock.
All right. This segment brought to you by Fan Essentials. Be sure to check out fanessentials.net. Prices start at $14.99 to $34.99. Get the right gear, amazing gear, to get you started on this upcoming NBA season. Use the promo code BASELINE to get 30% off of your first month. Visit fanessentials.net. Shaw, the Toronto Raptors wasting no time to get the Messiah. Messiah Rigi is getting a contract extension, but I'm sure out to the Toronto Raptor fans in Jurassic Park, you can call him the Messiah.
Hey, great move for the Toronto Raptors, locking up, a great general manager, someone who has his pulse on the NBA, if you will. Great talent evaluator as well, too. Can't knock them for this decision. That Raptors team and the organization, especially at the top, is going to be staying intact for a little while longer, man.
Oh, yeah, and listen, I always want an executive who's ready to just go F you to Brooklyn. I'm all up for that. You know what I'm saying? So, Toronto Raptors, you got your man on lock. So now middle fingers back up in the North. Ty Lawson, sounds like he's got a new destination. He's being signed by the Sacramento Kings. Step up from Rajon?
Well, I guess. I'm gonna
have to slip up on that one.
No, I don't think it is. But either way, Lawson is looking to definitely get his career back on track. And a little bit of news too that this signing is he's a non-guaranteed deal, but it might really prove to be very, very important, as Darren Collison, I guess pled guilty to his misdemeanor domestic violence thing. So he may or may not be with the team to start the season. So Lawson is definitely a capable guy who might get the starting nod on opening night.
Yeah, and I'm more concerned about what's going to happen now for the Sacramento Kings. If the perception is especially now with the heightened sensitivity about domestic violence, should he even be on this basketball team? Forget the suspension that the NBA might have on him. If you're the Sacramento Kings, you want that on you with a struggling franchise and with everything kind of heightened around, good PR. should Darren Collinson still be a part of that basketball team because of the fact that it looks like he's going to plead guilty, plead no contest to this situation. So it'll be interesting to see. But if you're Ty Lawson, man, this is redemption, bro. I mean, he's so far removed from that successful season and that successful run he had from the Denver Nuggets. Wait and see what he can do with the Sacramento Kings. But all eyes are definitely going to be on the Kings organization to see how they do this situation properly. Kevin Seraphin finds himself now with the new team. For last season, he was playing with the New York Knicks. Now he plays with the Indiana Pacers. Good move by Mr. Bird.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it helps them with the depth standpoint of, their bigs. He doesn't really fit the pace, but they continue to get, things and pieces that none don't know what fit exactly what they want to do. Pieces, so,
yeah, we'll describe Seraphin as a thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting acquisition, I think, for me, with Miles Turner there, Al Jefferson already there too, and LeBoy Allen is there. So Seraphin is just gonna kind of be on that bench, and to provide some depth when it comes down to it. And Jefferson's the guy who typically gets hurt at some point too. So I get it, what I mean. But Seraphin 2-year deal, not too bad for the Pacers.
Hey, listen, he's a physical kind of guy, and the Pacers certainly want to bully up against some of the other teams that are trying to get big in the Central Division. This Philadelphia 76ers waive Carl Landry. Not too much of a head scratcher, but it does kind of raise the question about where the 76ers are with this quote-unquote trust the process, getting rid of a veteran like Carl Landry.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only thing that I can say that I don't necessarily understand. Get rid of a veteran guy who was definitely helpful to that locker room per se. But as you said, I think on every show, it seems like somehow Sixers news comes up. They have too many bigs, and Landry and Tibor Pleiss, those guys, they can't make this roster with all the plethora of bigs on this team. So Landry ends up being a casualty of war, if you will, despite having a veteran presence that they could potentially use.
All right, out in Denver, interesting move. Geoffrey Lavoniere, if you didn't see him play, he was part of the French national basketball team. He also, at spot moments in Denver, was a pretty good backup 4-5 guy behind Jokic. He finds himself now in OKC. Man, if you're OKC, you got a sneaky good player here in Lavoniere.
Yeah, and it only cost them some cash and a couple, second-round picks, if you will. I think it says a lot about what they feel about McGarry and some of the other younger bigs behind this. They're not going to let Sabonis, thrust him out there and throw him to the wolves, if you will. But it did also open up another conversation, which I saw, a little bit before it went on air, in terms of they may now entertain something for Kanter so that they can fill that small forward void left by Kevin Durant. And then they feel like Lavernier and Ilyasova and those guys could play a 4 position if they were to move Kanter. Not saying that they're going to do that, but it gives them at least the option to potentially do that at some point during the season. Either way, it says more about Mitch McGarry and some of the other bigs on this roster that Lavernier was acquired.
It says a heck of a lot more about Presti and the moves that this dude is trying to make. I mean, listen, losing Durant, but you're still putting together some nice pieces and still keeping this. Listen, can we safely say that the bench of Oklahoma City might actually be better, a deeper and better bench than the Golden State Warriors? So, yeah,
I'd be debatable, but yeah, that's our lineup though. So.
Yeah, exactly. That starting lineup, though, I just, just to point that out. Finally, Shaw, Lance Stevenson. Lance can make him dance. Seems like he wants to do his dances down in Norla. The Pelicans are giving him a workout session. So does that mean that there's a possibility he could really be on that roster?
Well, I mean, they're looking at wing players, and, we've talked about Tyreek will not be available to begin the year, so Lance could be an option from that. If he were to sign in New Orleans, probably would be a non-guaranteed deal, something that, they could maybe cut him by January and not guarantee the rest of his contract if Tyreek were to come back. Stevenson is playing for his NBA life right now, and it's crazy to think about that when, just a couple years ago, he was, one of the hottest commodities in free agency. Now he might be out of the league, if this thing in New Orleans doesn't work out. I still think he has NBA level talent, but I just don't know if people are willing to give him that shot. It's just one of those things where some people get kind of ostracized based on their previous results and locker room stuff and all that. But I hope it works out for Lance. Lance is a good guy, has a good heart, and definitely should be in the NBA somewhere.
I think in some instances, man, he's a fun basketball player when his mind and his focus is strictly on the game. And he's not, exerting himself with all of the other extracurricular stuff that's kind of put him in this position, to your point about being ostracized. So it'll be interesting to see. Listen, there's a destination where a bunch of wild bandits can probably turn into the Magnificent Five. It could very well be in the New Orleans area. And what better way to probably do that than play in a very high offensively powered system that is, co-captain, so to speak, by Mr. Gentry himself. So we'll see how this all plays out. Clearly, one thing is for certain. Lance will not be short of being a reliable basketball player because rarely is health an issue with him. It's just that mental thing. That's all. That little mental block.
We wish him the best,
Wish him the best. Listen, man, awesome show this week, Shaw. What more can we possibly say? Great opportunity in talking with Josh Eberly from Hoops Mag, breaking down that Hoop 10 project. And it's just obviously taking off. And just to have an opportunity to have the brainchild spearheading it and giving us some insight on the depths in which he's had to go to, the bridges and that he's had to cross and possibly has been burnt, putting out together this awesome project so far through the summer, man. It was just absolutely wild.
Yeah, kudos to him for taking on the ire of the basketball world, if you will. When you do something like this, you're definitely sure to piss many people off, and fan bases, and those bandwagon guys of certain players that can never do no wrong in some fans' eyes, if you will. So I commend him and the entire team of 20+ writers that have joined him and helped him put this project together. Great conversation on our show too, and we'd love to hear from you guys too. Who's your Hoop 10? In terms of the 10 best individual NBA seasons out there as well. We'll be definitely chiming in when the rest of the list gets released in the next coming weeks or so too. So thanks for much for tuning in, man. Another great show.
Yeah, and disclaimer, when you put it out there, be careful. Shots may get fired right back, boy. I tell you, shots fired. Get the Kevlar on, boy, because it might go crazy before you even know it. But awesome show, nevertheless. And once again, we'd like to thank our man Josh Eberly for hopping on board. For the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys, each and every single one of you, and we can't wait to catch up with you next time.